I'm Kenneth Joseph of Pretty Boy Films Inc. and today we're going to present to you the Steeltown Records Untold Story Jackson 5 promo. In this promo release you will see Mr. Gordon Keefe sharing with you the most tragical moments of what happened to him in 1968 of May at the Apollo Theater with the Jackson 5s. Also in this promo you will see two of the Jackson 5 family members sharing with you what happened when they met Mr. Ben Brown. Mr. Ben Brown at that time was a executive, or shall I say a co-executive producer of Steeltown Records from 1967 through 1968. What Ben Brown did was he went behind Mr. Keith's back, got some information from Mr. Keith, which had allowed him to go to a pressing house and press out a huge amount of 45s of Big Boy. Went to one of the Jackson relatives and asked one of them to help him promote or distribute the record in Gary, Indiana, without them knowing exactly his purpose, his intent. The main goal of this release is to introduce to the world small fragments of what happened to Mr. Keith back in those days. First off, I want to say that I'm highly passionate about Mr. Gordon Keefe's life back then, and I truly think in my heart that it is time that the world knows exactly how the Jackson was wrongfully piloted to Motown. Without further ado, I would like to present to you the Steeltown Records Untold Story of the Jackson 5. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. I want to tell you the untold story about Joe Jackson and the Jackson 5. Now, I am the kingmaker of the king of pop. I am Gordon Keith. And with Steeltown Records, a label that we used as a kickoff label for our artists and so forth, I was blessed enough to get the Jackson 5 that had Michael Jackson. And Michael Jackson is the main reason that I picked the Jackson 5. Now, I'm getting ready, though, at this point, to go to New York City because we were playing at the Apollo Theater. The Jacksons were playing at the Apollo Theater in 1968. After we got that Apollo gig, to perform at the Apollo Theater, I was talking to, let's say, Tyrone Davis. And Tyrone Davis told me, he said, man, look, you better watch them Jacksons, okay? Now, Tyrone Davis was a person that was just hitting it up real good with his music, a tune called Baby Can I Change My Mind. Well, I really didn't think that the Jacksons were going to change their mind and mess me around, so I told Tyrone, I said, hey, man, I don't think they're going to, I don't think I have anything to worry about. I just didn't believe it, because, I was doing all I could for them, and I had already gotten them the kind of contract that they said that they wanted, because I knew Steeltown Records could not take them all the way, and so we had to get them to a major label. So I got them to Atlantic Records, which we signed March 5th, 1968. And so we're on our way. And so I get to the Apollo Theater. I got some money from Lucky Cordell for a plane ticket. And I went to New York City. A cab took me to the hotel. I forgot the name of the hotel, and when I got there, I was tired. But I seen all of the Jackson 5 there with Joseph. I seen James Pearson there. He was with them. Now, we called James Pearson Baby James. But also a guy was there by the name of Richard Aarons, whom I had never met before. Now, but remember, I'm tired, so I go take a little break. And as I'm resting, I hear the Jacksons, Richard Aarons, Baby James, and Joseph Jackson talking about doing productions and gigs without me. Now, they didn't say without me, but they were doing all this talking as if that's what they were going to do, but they were leaving me out. So I got up and I approached them immediately about it. And I told them, I said, well, what's going on? You guys are talking as if I am not in this picture with you. And so they just subdued the conversation. They said, yeah, you with us, Now, that's how that went. Now, the next day, I went up to Atlantic Records to talk to them to get an advance. I got an advance of $500. By the way, the person that okayed that advance was the vice president of Atlantic Records at that time. His name was Henry Allen. And so he gives me the check for $500. I go and cash the check. I come back and I tell Joe I'd like to talk to him. We met at the back part of the Apollo Theater. And I give him his $300. I kept $200. I asked him, I said, what's going on, Joe? I said, now, I went to Atlantic Records and got this advance, but they also told me that I no longer represented the Jacksons, that you had came there with your attorney, Richard Aarons, and that they couldn't see where I still had anything to do with you all. So I asked him about that, and Joseph told me, he said, Gordon, I'm just trying to make it. I'm just trying to make it, man. Now, I really don't remember what I said after that. I really don't, because I wasn't feeling good, and I think, I was probably angry. So all I remember after that conversation is I took a long walk down 125th Avenue in New York City, one of the longest streets in New York City. I walked down 125th Street more than 2 or 3 hours. But what I seen down 125th Avenue, I seen a lot of slums. I seen a lot of people that looked like they needed a lot of help. Even I seen little babies that looked like they were on a drunk. That's how bad they looked to me. Now maybe my mind was imagining something. I don't know. But I said to myself, I said, you got to pull yourself together, man. At least you got a job back home. I worked at in the steel mill, LTV Steel in Indiana or East Chicago, Indiana, and I had a house and a home. So I said, well, hey, no matter what is going on, you still got something that you can hang your hat on. So I decided I would go back and get my things and come on back to Gary, Indiana. Part of the reason for doing that right away is that because I said to myself, there's no telling what they have planned for me after all of this double crossing that they are doing. And even though I have relatives in New York City, I did not have their information on me, so I didn't know who to call. So I figured it was best for me to leave and get on out of Dodge, as they say, and come back home. Now that's the way it was in New York City at the Apollo Theater. I'm back home in Gary, Indiana. This is about a week, maybe a little less than a week. I'm listening to the radio. Eddie Holland is a disc jockey on WMPP. Now this is probably 4 days after I get back from the Apollo Theater. I hear on the radio from Eddie Holland, he broadcast this, that the Jacksons had just signed with Motown Records. Now, I might have some of this a little mixed up because they came back and they played the Regal Theater again, and they let's say on that program was Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers, and so Bobby Taylor loved them so much that he decided that he was going to hook them up with Motown. So he took them to Motown, and they signed with Motown right away. In spite of all that other news that you hear on, let's say, or see on the internet, the Jacksons signed with Motown right after Bobby took them up there around April or May of 1968. Now, right after they signed, obviously, they broadcasted their, let's say, happiness to a lot of different people. They called back here, and evidently they called WMPP and other stations. But Eddie Holland made this special broadcast that the Jacksons had just signed with Motown. Now, about a day or two later, I got a call from the last guy that helped the Jacksons double-cross me, whose name is attorney Richard Aarons. He is an attorney. He's still on their payroll even today. And Richard Aarons called me and said, Gordon, what is this shit I hear about the motherfucking Jackson 5 signing with Motown? I told him, I said, hey man, I really don't know. I just heard it on the radio. That's all I can tell you. So he told me, Richard Aarons said, I am going to put a motherfucking stop to their goddamn ass. And that's it. He hung up the phone. And that's the way that went. So I know most of that summer, I got word that the Jacksons were rehearsing and recording out in L.A. At Motown, headquarters and things out there. And at the same time, I knew that Richard Aarons had put a legal, let's say, halt to their forward momentum with Motown, because we did not hear anything else from the Jacksons as far as Motown is concerned until the record was finally released in 1969. However, during that time, they had a lot of things, bad promo going on, that was giving credit of their discovery to all the way from Gladys Knight and the Pips, some other people. They gave credit to my mayor, the first black mayor of Gary, Richard Gordon Hatcher. They gave him credit. Matter of fact, I was writing for a black weekly called Info in those days as well, and so Mrs. Harris of Info, she asked me to cover Operation Breadbasket for them. So I said, sure. So I went over to cover Operation Breadbasket, and a partner of mine who had a newspaper, a weekly newspaper called Iceberg Review, his name was Twig Crockett. So we went over there together. And Reverend Jesse Jackson came out on stage, and then he called to the Honorable Richard Gordon Hatcher, and he called him to come out on stage, and he introduced the Honorable Richard Gordon Hatcher as the man that discovered the Jackson 5. What you think about that? During the meantime, I'm talking to Atlantic Records. They're saying there's nothing they can do about it because Attorney Richard Aarons has everything in court right now. And so, in the meantime, I also ran into Joseph over in Hammond, Indiana, at a place called the KC Ballroom. And he's asking me for some money. I really don't know what I said to him. I just looked at him because I had another group very much like them that they knew well. The group was called The Ripple and the Waves plus Michael. So we all knew each other, and the Ripple and Waves had just finished performing, and so I was leaving with them, and so the Jacksons was just getting ready to come on. And so, later on, I called up Barry Gordy. Really, I called him probably 6 or 7 months later or so. And we were talking on the phone. And I asked him what was going on with the Jacksons, and was I going to get my percentage, my cut of all of this, because he had bought my contract, or was trying to buy my contract from Atlantic Records. This is still 1968. And so Barry Gordy said to me, he said, "Gordon, you ain't got nothing coming." And he slung, he hung up the phone. Bam. That's the way that was. It's the last time I ever talked to him. First and last time I talked to him. I certainly did not like what Barry had to say to me, so I felt bad about it, just like I did in finding out about the double cross. I felt real bad about it, but what could I do? I mean, there's nothing I could do to him because we're talking on the phone, And so, I knew I had to do something. I contacted an attorney, Frederick Work. He's a good attorney. Frederick Work, his father was a famous, songwriter, musician, and so forth, Dr. Fred Work. He wrote, some great, black gospels like My Lord, What a Morning. So that was a big song in his day, right on up to the day. It's good singing. I sing it myself, And so Attorney Fred Work told me some months later, after he had made contact with Motown, etc., he told me that I did not have a case. That's what he told me. Even though some years later, from many different attorneys, especially entertainment attorneys, they told me I had a case right here, a case right there, and so forth, So I'm not going to say anything wrong against the late attorney Fred Work because he's deceased now, but it just goes to show you I should have had entertainment or intellectual property attorney. Attorney Fred Work was a criminal lawyer. Yeah, now over the years, I've tried to put out music, including I put out one of their songs, the Jackson songs called Over 21, Flipside Jam Session. But even before then, I had already heard that Barry Gordy and Joseph Jackson was going to do all that they could to make sure that my music was not played. As a matter of fact, I heard from a friend of mine, Lil Rockin' Joe, that used to live in Gary, but he moved back to around Greenville and West Point, Mississippi, and he got word of that, so he wrote me as well as called me and told me this, okay? But I seem to recollect that Joseph Jackson gave me that warning himself of that he's going to make sure that I didn't get into my music played. Now, can you imagine somebody making that threat to me, and they are the ones that did the wrong? They did the double crossing, but they're going to threaten me. And so, yeah, I'm being repetitious here. Yes, Motown and Joseph Jackson, as well as whoever that worked for them, ended up saying that they were going to make sure that I couldn't get my music played or anything else in the entertainment industry, and that has worked out to be so, because right here in Gary, Indiana, especially the 20 years that Mayor Richard Gordon Hatcher was mayor, man, I had a real tough time. I mean, I had fights, half fights, pushing and shoving with Richard Gordon Hatcher's bodyguards, okay, yelling back and forth between him and me and so forth, okay. Even it was put out that if it was put out by Richard Gordon Hatcher's administration that if anybody in the city was caught fraternizing with people that didn't particularly care for Richard Gordon Hatcher, that they could lose their job if they were working for the city. Guess what? When I got married, my wife worked for the city. And so, I mean, we had to be real quiet so that she wouldn't lose her job. Okay, can you imagine that? Now, this thing here, I'm kind of skipping and jumping around a little bit. Yeah, I ran into, in the 1972 political convention, I met the late Dr. Martin Luther King's wife there. I met the Honorable, beautiful, intelligent Coretta Scott King. And so I talked to her about my problem with the mayor and Joseph Jackson. And she told me that she was going to be having dinner with them, with Katherine Jackson and family within a couple of weeks. And she said that she would talk to them about that. And sure enough, she evidently had talked to them, because I didn't even tell a friend of mine, Ludi Washington, about this conversation with the late, great Coretta Scott King. But he told me that, hey man, guess what? Miss Coretta Scott King had talked to the Jacksons about you. And I said, yeah, I knew this, but I didn't know that you would know. And so he said, yeah, they had that conversation, because that's what they told me. So in other words, let's say she was a good person. She kept her word to me. She did the best that she could, but it never changed the heart of the Jackson family. They've been kicking my behind for well over 40-some years or so. I like for people to know out there that, I really love Joe Jackson and his family. When I first met them, they were they seemed to be real nice. But the way that they have turned out, I still love them. I've tried to reconcile with them for many, many years, but they don't seem to want to reconcile. I've tried to remind them about their promises that they made to help Steeltown and myself develop talent back here in Gary, Chicago metropolitan area. And people need to know that even though the Jacksons lived in Gary, Indiana, I and others really discovered them in Chicago. Chicago is really the place where I and Rodney Jones and Purvis Spann, Lucky Cordell, Herb Kent, Don Cornelius, and Lucky Cordell, I hope I said that already, but we are the ones that discovered Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5 in Chicago. Now, as I said, I still love the Jacksons anyway because we have to love. That's what Jesus Christ taught us, is to love one another. I'm absolutely sure I have did my part, but I sure hope and pray that the Jacksons will still wake up and remember to love us back. And I'm not talking about just Gary. The promises were based on helping East Chicago, Indiana, Gary, Indiana, Lake County, Indiana, and the Chicago metropolitan area. Those were promises made by the Jackson family. As we talked in that room, they made that promise in the Jacksons' front living room. The only person in their family that was not in that particular meeting was Rebe. She was not there because, she had a problem with her father. I don't even care to bring it up what it really was, but she was not there. Now, I found out late in the game that I should not have trusted Joseph Jackson because I found out later that all kinds of people were talking behind my back, trying as hard as they could to get the Jackson 5 away from me and Atlantic Records.
Hi, I'm Lucky Cordell. And I was asked to participate in, and I feel privileged and have the opportunity to be a part of this documentary film paying tribute to Gordon Keith. Gordon's a fine man who was really the person that discovered the Jackson 5. When Gordon saw these kids perform, he was impressed enough to start to manage them, which included their rehearsals and taking them, literally driving them to shows and treating them to lunches, and setting an example for them that by being a man, that they could follow. They were blessed to have Gordon Keith in their lives in their early career, and the public in general never really realized the role that Gordon Keith played. So I'm hoping that this production by Pretty Boy Productions will shine a light on this unsung hero who did much but received little. Gordon, when he came to me and asked my opinion of the J5, he played some records and songs by them. I was impressed. I told him so. He offered me the opportunity of joining him in this venture, and I had to decline because of my position as manager. It would have been a conflict of interest. But I assured him that I would do everything I could to help him because I felt this group was deserving of the spotlight. I never will forget that on one occasion, Gordon played a tape for me when he was recording the boys. And he heard J5's father, Joe Jackson, made the comment, "If you boys keep singing like this, I can come out of this factory, come out of this mill." And he certainly has. Once again, my sincerest congratulations to Gordon Keith for his contribution to one of the world's greatest groups, greatest talent, and congratulations to Pretty Boy Productions for being the ones to shine the light on this unsung hero who was never shown the kind of appreciation that he deserved from the J5 organization. And it was like, I'm pleased to do this because there were stories that they were discovered by Diana Ross. What really happened, promotion men who promote records to the industry, and I don't know who it was, but passing through Gary, heard of and saw the Jackson 5 and was so impressed that they took the information back to Gordy, Mr. Gordy. And I asked Gordon, when he first brought the tapes to me to get my opinion, after hearing it, I wanted to be sure that he had, was going to be, was going to enjoy some of the success of this group that I thought was going to be big. So I asked him, "Do you have a contract on the boys?" And he assured me. And he didn't have the knowledge on it, nor did I really. But he had a solid contract with all the boys signed it, but they were not of age. So it didn't take with the kind of lawyers that the Motown powerhouse had. It was very easy for them just to walk over that contract and sign with Motown Records. Along with this tribute to Gordon Keith, much deserved and late, I do tip my hat to Motown Records for honing and sharpening and showing us the finished product of the Jackson 5. Truly one of the greatest groups of our time that will live in history. And in the halls of rhythm and blues and pop. I would just like to mention the fact that when Gordon recorded the first recording of the Jackson 5 on his own label, tune called Big Boy. When Gordon brought the record to the station, and the then music director was E. Rodney Jones, after Rodney listened and I listened, we were both excited at this talent, and we would have certain records as each week as the format would shift that we would feature. We might call it this week's power record, or with names for just highlighted this particular record, and that the J5 was given that spot when the record was first released, which gave them, not only gave them exposure, but it magnified it by making it special. And even then, as I reflect, there was a certain excitement surrounding the Jackson 5 at radio station WVON. I'm fairly certain that VON was the first radio station to play the Jackson 5 in Chicago. I don't know whether WMPP was playing it, or whether the local station in Gary at the time was playing it. But soon enough, all the local stations, local R&B stations, were playing it. It was never, to my knowledge, played on the big pop outlets, the WLS or CFL or any of the stations that were primarily played pop music. I don't think it ever saw the light of day. But VON, that little radio station sitting on the bank of a river at 33rd and Kedzie, got behind it and made a contribution to the success of these boys.
Is there anything else that's rambling in your mind that you could, and I know it's kind of hard to go back into those days, but if you could, is anything? I was thinking he was mentioning something about the intent of how Atlantic Records did him and how Gordy did him, and how he's mentioned something about, it was mentioned on a radio station, I forgot the name of the man. He said it was his buddy had mentioned it, that the Jackson had just signed with Motown. Can you recall any of that, of how that happened? Okay.
No, I can't.
Okay.
That's about
it?
That's about it, son.
Okay.
And you know, you can chop it up any way
Oh, yeah.
And
I just want to say it's really been an honor to be able to sit here in your living room and talk to you.
well, it's a real pleasure.
It's God is good, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for this opportunity. It's a blessing.
Well, you're working with a good guy who is deserving of attention. I've always said that. Whenever I've done an interview and Jackson 5 was in any way mentioned or their success, I always took the opportunity to mention Gordon because I knew that he never got the kind of accolades that he should have got, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It was like he never existed. And I blame Joe Jackson because the boys, I mean, they weren't, you know, they weren't calling any shots. And their dad was handling things, and so it really would be upon him to reach back, and they could have given Gordon an opportunity to be road manager or just something, you know. Even if he didn't accept it, they should have offered. And as I mentioned earlier, when they came to play in Maryville, big act then, and nobody was sensitive enough there in Gordon's backyard to send him an invitation, you know, send him some tickets. To me, that was the cruelest, you know.
Yeah, I could just imagine how you felt.
Oh, sure.
You know.
I was mad when I was sitting there and I saw that they had sent him a basket of fruit. You know, I mean, here these guys are millionaires, and they sent him a basket of fruit. The man who got him started, you know.
And you know, they never mentioned him when the boys made it. They never mentioned him every moment with it from the time they got interviewed. They never talked about
Right. That's right. That's what I'm saying. It's like he didn't exist, you know. I mean, like he never, you know. And okay, I blame the dad, but after these boys got grown, you know, I mean, you would have thought one of them at least would have thought to mention. But in any interviews that I've seen, as a matter of fact, it was almost like they didn't want to identify with Gary. A lot of people think even today that they're Californians, you know, I mean, because they never mentioned Gary. Later, I mean, more recent, I think there was some mentions, but before that, they didn't identify with Gary. You know, and it would have meant something to Gary if it didn't do anything but help him to feel proud, lift him up. Because when I was in Gary, it was the heyday of Gary. All the steel mills were booming, and Broadway was, you couldn't rent a spot on Broadway anywhere downtown. All of your big shops that finally, when the steel mills went down, and the big shops moved to Maryville. And unfortunately, I think many of our people followed them to Maryville and spent their money out there. So it's always been not only Gary, but any town or any community that's a one industry community. If that industry goes down, you know, when the steel mill shut down, man, and by the time we got the first black mayor, and he inherited an absolute mess. Gary has never. I went to Gary a couple years ago, and I drove down Broadway, and it hurt me. All the beautiful shops were gone. They had two movie theaters. They were both shut down. And in my mind, as I drove, I'm looking at what used to be and what is. And Gary so needs another industry to develop there, to replace. I mean, the jobs that were available all depended on the money that was coming from the steel mills. Right. Your restaurants and your stores and, you know, your teachers, and everybody was depending on money that was generated from the mills. So I've enjoyed this chat with you. Share with me, and congratulations to Mr. Gordon Keith for his contributions to the Jackson 5 that he was never recognized for. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ethel B. Wilbon Edwards. I'm a relative of Katherine Jackson. One day, unexpectedly, Benjamin Brown came by my house, and he had a stack of records in his hands. And he asked my dad, can I help him promote my cousin's record called I'm a Big Boy Now. He told my dad that he was the manager of the Jackson 5 and that he was working with Joe Jackson. And he also stated that he was working with Steel City Records, which Gordon Keith was running at that time. So I was surprised because my father was very strict. He said that I could go and leave with Benjamin. So as Benjamin and I was walking, we ran into a lot of teenagers our age, and we was discussing the record, and we sold some and we passed out some. But as time went on, I started getting cold because it was cold outside. And so all of a sudden I came up with this great ideal. I said, Benjamin, why don't we do it like this? You take the east side of town, I'll take the west side of town, and we'll distribute the record like that. And all the ones we can't sell, we'll give them away so all the kids in Gary will know about this record. And after that point, you could go and take it to Ragman down to WWCA, because all the kids are going to be calling in asking for that record to be dedicated. So as time went on, that is exactly what happened. So Benjamin took the record down to Ragman at WWCA, and the record blew up. It was on the radio, and everybody was thinking the Jacksons was famous all of a sudden. So we promoted a concert that was going to be held at the KC Ballroom on 5th and Madison. So when we got to the ballroom, we went upstairs, and me and my siblings and a lot of our friends, we went to the back of the crowd. It was crowded in there. So we did a lot of my choreography. We all lined up and was doing dances and stuff like that together. And so the show started, so we went to the front. But when we got to the front, before the show started, it was two girls in the audience. They was heckling the Jacksons, saying, oh, y'all rich, y'all famous, y'all got a record on the radio, and y'all got on some high water pants, buy y'all a new uniform. So I got hurt. My feelings was hurt. My sister got hurt. So she grabbed one of the girls, and I grabbed the other girl. And we told them, you say one more word about my cousins, we're going to give you a beat down right here. And if you don't shut up, we're going to go on and beat you right now. But when you leave here, and if you don't leave, we're going to beat you up afterwards. So they be quiet. They shut their mouth. So as the concert got started, we went straight to the front on the stage. And Michael sung the song Tobacco Road. And when he sung that song Tobacco Road, everybody in there was crying. Even the girls that was heckling them were crying. Myself was crying. I was leaking tears all on the stage. My sister was crying. Everybody in that crowd was crying because Michael was so hurt about the way they were talking about him. And he whooped them with that song, and everybody was crying. And after that song, he sung an upbeat song, and they were jamming. Oh, they got down. But Marlon, he took off on his own. He just went off on his own and started doing his own thing. And Marlon, I'm going to tell you the truth. That young man tore that flow up. He was jamming down. And so finally, they got to the record, I'm a Big Boy Now. When they started singing that song, the crowd went crazy. They were loud and screaming like they were really famous. And they hadn't gotten famous yet. They were still poor just like the rest of us. And as that day, as the concert ended, we all left. But those two girls, we kept our eyes on them. And when we told them, we promised you to beat down for talking about my cousins like that. So we beat them down, my sister and I. But at the time we was beating them down, I started getting scared. Started thinking about my father. So I grabbed my sister Clementine and dragged her halfway down Broadway. And everybody was running all the way to Broadway. We got on the bus. We made it home. And my dad asked us how was everything. We said, it was beautiful, Dad. It was a beautiful concert. And we started watching TV. And we act like we was good kids, like we hadn't done anything. So it was beautiful. So it wasn't over. So we kept promoting the record, I'm a Big Boy Now. So we had another concert at the Cadillac Ballroom. It went very well. And after that, we had another concert at it was the annual picnic that we had every year. It was in Black Oak. And we was from the small farm, but it was annexed as Gary. But at the time, it wasn't part of Gary. But we had that annual picnic. So the Jacksons was there at that time, and they were there doing their thing, singing their new record that was on the radio. We was in this barn-like thing, doing our dances. It was a great show. Then they had another concert in our area in Black Oak. It was called the Black Oak Center. They did a show there. And then as time went on, they just got famous. And that's where Diana Ross, Mayor Hatcher, and everybody started claiming that they discovered the Jackson 5, which wasn't true. But that's what everybody believed. Next thing I know, they was going to Motown, and Berry Gordy got them. And they forgot all about Mr. Gordon Keith, as if he didn't even exist. But actuality, he should have been the first one that they gave some props to, because he the one took his time out at Steel City Records and helped this group get where they are to this day. He haven't got no recognition yet, or neither have I. I'm the one walked in the cold. Then no one else walked in the cold. Even the people that did the song didn't promote the song like I did, or Mr. Gordon Keith, because he took his time out and used his recording studio to help these people. And they haven't given his acknowledgement yet. And this is why I'm telling the truth today. So the real story can get out to the world. So they'll know the truth. Someone needs to know the truth. It has nothing to do with trying to help anybody, because my cousin is gone on to glory now. And God bless him. So 15 years later, I'm working at the Blackstone on 5th and Madison. It was a police-owned place. It was a bar and a grill. But I was the cook there. So Benjamin Brown showed up again on my job, but this time he had a stack of papers. And so he talked to my bosses and asked them could he speak with me. So they closed the kitchen down. So I came out and I sat with Benjamin Brown in a booth. And so him and I was discussing the issue about I'm a Big Boy Now. At the time, him and I were promoting the record, I'm a Big Boy Now. And I told him, yeah, I remember that. He wanted me to look it over, and I looked over the documents, and I seen my name all through the documents, but I was at work, so I really didn't have time to read all of that. And he knew that. So I just skimmed through it, and I seen a few spots where I knew he was telling the truth about some of the stuff. But a lot of stuff he left out, and I didn't have time to read it, so I just signed all the documents. And as I finished signing the documents, I walked him to the door of the establishment, and he asked me to come on and let's go to California together, and we finna be rich. I said, Benjamin, I just can't pick up and leave my family and my children just like that. And he was like, okay, and I thought he was going to get back in touch with me and everything, but I never heard from him again. So 40 years later, maybe, yeah, had to be 40 some years later, because it was about a month ago. I'm 63 now. I ran into Mr. Gordon Keith at the county market, and I was telling him about that issue, about how I helped promote the Jackson 5's record, I'm a Big Boy Now, and that he was running Steel City Records at that time. And I told him about how Benjamin came by my house with a stack of records and asked my dad to help him promote the record. And Mr. Keith Gordon's mouth dropped open, and he looked at me, and I looked at him and was wondering what was going on. He said, is that what happened? And I'm like, yeah. He said, I took a bill to Mr. Joe Jackson thinking that he had the original copy and had the record stamped off. But I was mistaken. It was Benjamin Brown that done that. And so he said that we would get together and discuss this further, because we was in the grocery store. So during all that time, Benjamin Brown never acknowledged Mr. Gordon Keith, knowing that he was running Steel City Records, knowing that he had paid for and had that record stamped out for Mr. Joe Jackson. And Benjamin Brown, with his greed, never gave Mr. Keith Gordon his just dues. So I'm here today to tell the truth. And I only found out recently that that had happened. It was 40 years later that Mr. Gordon Keith and I put the pieces together, knowing that he was the one that had did the misdeed. He used that for his own greed. He sold records to put money in his own pocket. And I only done it because I want to help my cousins to do what I always heard them do. Because on the weekends, my father used to take us to East Chicago every weekend to see my grandmother. And when we be over there, Michael and them would be in their grandmother's garage practicing when they were poor and didn't have anything. So I knew the struggle that they was trying to get where they were trying to go. So I didn't mind helping my cousins to do this because I love music myself. But Benjamin, he just used my family status and my the knowledge of my family and the relationship I had with the Jacksons, because my mom and Catherine were close. And my auntie Aunt Annie, they were very close. And he knew these things, and he used it against my family status to manipulate me to get where he was trying to go, and at the same time misuse Mr. Gordon Keith at that same time, and had Mr. Gordon Keith thinking that Mr. Joe Jackson had that record stamped behind his back, and he took Mr. Joe Jackson the bill for those records. But it wasn't Mr. Joe Jackson, it was Benjamin Brown. The public think that Mayor Hatcher, Diana Ross got the Jacksons famous, but that's just the underline, because they don't want to get to the real facts of what actually happened. What actually happened was Mr. Keith Gordon had the radio station. He had the recording studio, Steel City Records. He the one invested his time in helping the Jacksons. But when it came out to the real truth, because I helped promote that record and it became big, all of a sudden now I'm nobody. Mr. Keith Gordon ain't nobody. And the mayor and Diana Ross come in from nowhere and say they discovered them. They the one promoted them. But actually it didn't start there. They just took it from there. Then they took them and went to Detroit, to Berry Gordy. And that is not what happened, but that's the way it ended up. They got all the acknowledgement. Diana Ross and Mayor Hatcher, as if Steel City Records didn't even exist. They act like I'm a Big Boy that never exists. You notice how many years it came before they even mentioned that record. They tried to push that under the rug like it never happened, so Diana Ross and Mayor Hatcher's story would look true to the world. But the truth is, they started out with I'm a Big Boy Now, and I helped promote it, and Mr. Gordon Keith put his time and his money into that record, and that's the truth.
My name is Clementine Wilbon, and I'm fourth cousin to Catherine Jackson, and Ethel Wilbon Edwards is my older sister. And I'm the mediator on how her and Mr. Gordon Keith were able to connect on I'm a Big Boy Now. And when I was 9 years old, Michael and I are the same age. And I remember her promoting I'm a Big Boy Now. And when she actually gave the first concert at KC Ballroom, she took me with her. And as they had a fight after the show, we were running down Fifth Avenue to Broadway. And years later, I continued to run into Mr. Gordon Keith, and my sister had never actually met him. And I asked him when was he going to tell the real story about how Big Boy came about and how he actually promoted the Jackson Fives. And I told him I felt like he should get his turn to say, the position he played in helping them become who they are. And finally, my sister had an opportunity to meet Mr. Gordon Keith, and we were supposed to get together to discuss on writing a book or something about how I'm a Big Boy came about. And maybe 2 months ago, we were standing in the grocery store at County Market. My sister and Mr. Gordon Keith were talking, and they were just casually talking about how she promoted I'm a Big Boy Now and the stack of records that he had passing out. And then Mr. Gordon Keith's eyes looked, his mouth dropped. He said, "What records that you were passing around?" She said, "The ones that you gave to Benjamin Brown." He said, "I never gave him any records." And then he said, at that point, I took Joe Jackson the invoice because I thought he had the records pressed. So it took him 40 years later to find out how the records really were pressed and distributed. He had no knowledge. After I saw the expression on Mr. Gordon Keith's face that he really didn't know and found out 40 years later, I told him I would do anything to help him at least be acknowledged. So within that, that's the part that I played as far as actually just being there to know that my sister actually promoted the record I'm a Big Boy. She's the one who actually set up the different venues for them to perform, whether it's the Cadillac Ballroom in Chicago and different places through Benjamin Brown. However, she never got any credit for the part that she played in helping promote I'm a Big Boy Now. Benjamin Brown deceived Mr. Gordon Keith and never gave him any credit for what he did to help promote the record I'm a Big Boy Now, nor did they give any credit to my sister Ethel Wilbon Edwards for being able to help promote the record. All the public ever knew was about Mary Gordon Hatcher and Diana Ross, which is not the truth. The truth will be told, and I told Mr. Gordon it may have taken a lot of years for the truth to come out, but God put us together so the truth can come out. Because I was the missing piece through my sister for you to know. You didn't have any knowledge that you were deceived by Mr. Benjamin Brown because you thought Joe Jackson had actually had the records pressed, which is not the truth.
My name is Leroy Phillips. I was a record promoter for Wonderful Records and United Record Distributors in the early 60s. That is where I first met Mr. Gordon Keith. He brought Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5 down to Wonderful Records to record them. But before that, E. Rodney Jones and Purvis Spann, who was one of the biggest disc jockeys in the city, used to have a talent show at the Regal Theater. And every week, the Jackson 5 would win this contest. And it got to a point where no one else wanted to appear on the show because they figured, why appear? We're not going to win anyway. So after they had won so many contests, then Purvis figured, well, let's take them down to George and Ernie and see if they will record these kids. Well, they brought them down to Wonderful, and George heard them, and he declined, saying that no, I don't want to be bothered with no young kids. You're going to need, first off, Michael's voice is going to change. Right now it's just a novelty. And after that, you're going to need chaperones if they go on the road, and I just don't have time and don't want to be bothered with that. Just too much problem. So then later on, after George turned them down, Gordon Keith recorded them. And then Gordon bought the record down to United Distributorship, where I was the promoter, and said that he needed some help in getting them exposed. Now, my area was Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana. Well, since he pretty much had Indiana sold up, my job was to cover Illinois and Indiana at all of the various radio stations and newspapers and gossip columnists or whatever kind of promotion or exposure that I could get to them. I could get them, pardon me. There was rumors going around later on that Diana Ross discovered them. That is as far from the truth as the East is from the West, and the North is from the South. If you want to go to the term discover, they were discovered by a man named Gordon Keith, who worked at the steel mill with Joe Jackson. Hence, that's where the name Steeltown Records come from. Gordon wanted to be an entrepreneur, and he wanted to be like Berry Gordy. So he figured, well, since George refused these kids, now here's my chance to record them or to get a record out on them. He put the record out, like I said, and brought it down to Wonderful and wanted me to help him promote it. Later on, at the time, Mayor Hatcher, who was the first black mayor of any major city, was having a rally or a fundraiser at Gilroy Stadium in Gary. And quite naturally, when anything happened in Gary, the Jackson 5 was automatically included in it. On that show was also Gladys Knight and Bobby Till and the Vancouvers, who was from Vancouver, British Columbia. They heard this little 9-year-old kid who was blowing everybody away, and they then in turn called Berry Gordy and told Berry Gordy about these young kids that they had just seen. Berry was like George, saying, well, I don't want to be bothered with no young kids. They're too much of a problem. You got to have chaperones, and kids' voices going to change. And they said, well, Berry, before you make that decision, why don't you at least hear these kids? So he says, okay, send me a video and let me hear them. They sent him a video, he heard them, and he got blown away. So after that, he then in turn invited like all of his artists and various program directors to his mansion out in California. After that, after they heard him, they were all everybody was excited. Now here's where Diana Ross come into the picture. Diana Ross was as big of artist as that Motown had ever seen. And everybody was wanting to book Diana Ross on the Tonight Show, the Jack Parr Show, the Ed Sullivan Show. So wherever they booked Diana Ross, they had to piggyback Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5. So that is how it came to believe that Diana Ross actually discovered them. Now, it's true that she catapulted them to a height that's unseen or no one would ever foresee. But in terms of actually discovering them, that is not true. That's far from the truth. Like I say, is the East is from the West and North is from the South. They were discovered again by a guy named Gordon Keith, who worked at the steel mill in Gary, Indiana.
Hello, my name is Larry Blassingame. I am a guitar player, and I got my start at the age 11 years old, with a group called the Four Dukes, and we were the backup band for the Baby Miracles. And we were kids, I was 15, the drummer was about 14, 13 years old, the bass player was 15. And it was amazing to see someone at our age playing. But at the same time, there was another group here in Chicago that was young like us, even with the lead singer younger than that. Us was the Jackson 5. Michael was about 7 or 8 years old, I think. I can't remember exactly. And we would run into them. This is before they came to Wonderful Records. We would run into them at social club sets playing the same type of shows. And we also ended up doing talent shows together. And that's pretty much was carried all through Chicago, because as far as the Jackson 5 living in Gary, their training was done here in Chicago. This is where you saw them. You could go almost anywhere and see them or our group, because we were a young group, the youngest local groups. I walked into the studio and there was a session, and I looked over into the studio section and it was the Jackson 5. And I was saying to him, I said, oh man, what are they doing here on my turf? Because, you know, we young, that's the way we thought and felt also, because sometimes we would have debates about who's going to use who equipment if we were on the same shows, which, you know, we were all kids and stuff, but all of us had our parents as chaperones. But anyway, I walked in the studio. Eddie Silvers, Jimmy Jones, Reginald Day, Otis Hayes, he was the engineer and co-producer there. He asked me to, after I had settled down and then watched what was happening, and he asked me, could you show Jermaine how to stop his bass from sounding booming? And I said, sure. So I went in the studio and got with Jermaine and showed him how to cup the fat part of his palm of his hand over his string while he played with his thumb. At that time, he played with his thumb. And so he did that. And so they got that straight with the engineer, and everyone was pleased because Eddie Silver was producing. He wrote and produced I'm a Big Boy. I forgot to mention that was the name of the record. And so as they got that straightened out, Eddie said, you have your guitar? And I said, yeah. He said, get your guitar. I want you to play this lick with them. And so that's how I ended up playing on their first recording. I ended up playing the little chop guitar part for them to help keep everything together. That's what we usually use, the chop guitar, which chop, 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 and you know, and that's all it was really, you know. Far as at the studio, me seeing them now, I didn't know that they were there until then, but I had always knew them because we were running into each other doing shows and stuff. And our parents, my father and their father, Joe, knew each other. And we used to play on this club on the west side of Chicago for Buddy Bear called The Confidential. And we would work there on weekends. We would play a certain night and they play a certain night. Sometimes we split up the weekend. And we had same people booking us, such as Luther Terry, who was managing, helping them. He also helped us. He was a policeman. And he would book us both. So we all kind of just knew each other. Sometimes we would go see them. And whether they knew it or not, we would see them. They used to be amazing how Michael was like 8 years old by then, and how he could control the audience and had these grown women screaming and hollering. He was a little kid performing for all of this. And sometimes people ask him, were you in a lounge? What he say? Yeah, we were in lounges, but we had our parents. We had chaperones with us. And so sometimes Joe, he would come and see us perform. And I remember when Joe, when they had left here, Gordon Keith's Steeltown Records, they went to Motown, and Joe brought the van by to show us what they had gotten from the deal that they made with Motown. But now I'm gonna go back to Gordon. I didn't know him then, but I had seen him. I saw him around them and stuff, and people were telling me who he was, you know, about the Steeltown Records. I don't know anything about his business partner, but I remember him because that's who they said he was when he had taken over the group. And also at that time, Purvis Spann, he also had something to do with the group too. And I don't know too much about that. I just know about the thing about, especially when Luther Terry, because we were working. That's how we would see each other. We was always running into each other. Steeltown Gordon, he did what no one else took time out to do. He exposed them. I give credit with that, because they did when I'm a Big Boy came out. That's all you was hearing. It was saturating the radio. Everywhere. They were destined to be because of Michael, and watched them develop. I watched how their harmony, their singing developed all the way up to Motown from Wonderful Records. Because what they did, I was told that someone else helped them on the actual I'm a Big Boy the record that was released, but the one that I was on, they did their own singing and and playing. And if you ever get a chance to hear that track, you will notice that there's a big difference in the production. They were getting, having the track that had been lost repaired. And they had some kind of way they caught up with Otis Hayes. Otis Hayes had retired, left here and moved to South Carolina. And I think that's where he was at, because I remember my father telling me that's where he was going when he left from here. And he helped them to get that together. And so they restored I'm a Big Boy Now, and Jake wrote a part 2, this story about the Jackson 5, about Michael, but mainly about this missing master, which had been missing, I don't know, for how many years, 40 years or more. And he came up with this other beautiful story to complete it. And he didn't hold nothing back, because he exposed the fact that, yeah, I was disturbed about what had been said. Because like I said, I didn't know that there were 2 recordings. But the recording that I was on was the first recording ever done by the Jackson 5. But I didn't know when the Jackson 5 didn't complete the deal that they had with Wonderful Records. They went with Steeltown Records, and they had recorded another version of it, but it was close, but it didn't have the quality as the first one. But anyway, that produced a part 2, a story of the missing master on the Jackson 5, which most people didn't even know ever existed. Today, you can hear this missing master on the computer. I think YouTube, or you can Google the story, and they have a sound track of the missing master. And like I said, there was no one knew about this master. A lot of people have no idea about how the Jackson 5 really got started. All they know is about Motown, and which Motown was not their beginning. The Jackson 5 was pretty much well established as entertainers here in this part of the country, and their record, I'm a Big Boy Now, did quite enough job for it to put them on the same show with the Shy Lights, Bobby Taylor, Jackie Wilson, the Artistics. They was right there in the middle with those groups. So how could you say that they was discovered at Motown when they were already discovered? This thing about Diana Ross discovering the Jackson 5 always kind of puzzled me, because like I said, they had already been discovered at Jackson 5. I remember we were, the Jackson 5, we had a theater on the west side of Chicago called the Central Park Theater. And the Jackson 5 was there. They were with Bobby Taylor, and I forget who else was there. The Originals were there also, background in Bobby Taylor. And I was saying, you know, this thing, when they said that Diana Ross discovered the Jackson 5, I said, how did they discover something that was already here? And it was playing all of the major places, nothing no different than what they did, what they were already doing. They didn't probably have the grand exposure that Motown did for them, but they were not an unknown group at all. Yeah, this experience that we're having right now, this has been really great. I was kind of tensed up about it, because I kind of thought this thing about the Jackson 5, Michael, was over with, but you never know. I received that call from Gordon and about you, because I didn't know. He said Kenneth Joseph. Who is Kenneth Joseph? So he ran down some things to me, and and then next thing I know, I received a call from you. And man, this has been another great experience for me. Way better than what I thought it was going to turn out to be, because I didn't know nothing about you, man. But hey, this is good. You made everything comfortable from the time that we saw. I even felt you when you was across the street and you called on the telephone. I felt I said, oh, this is going to be okay. And man, I pray that you be successful with this research this information that really needs to be out so people can have the complete understanding of such a great group as the Jackson, at that time the Jackson 5, and Michael, may God be pleased with him. You know, I would love to just close this with on a good note.
My name is Wilton Crump. I'm a musician, singer, arranger. And I have known Gordon Keith for many years. I believe the first time I met him, I was in high school. I had a group in high school called Wilton Crump and the Mellow Tones. And we would go around this area, Gary and Chicago, whatever, doing the different talent shows. Well, Gordon was starting a production company with some friends, and he would be at the various talent shows looking to see what talent was available that they could possibly produce to get on records. And that's how I first met him. I first became aware of him when I was on a talent show with a young group, and they called themselves the Jackson 5, and they later became superstars, and out of that group came the biggest superstar of all, was Michael Jackson, came out of that group. They started with Gordon's production company, so that's how they did. Well, they had done a song called Big Boy that was written by Eddie Silver out of Chicago, and it was a pretty good record. Well, in the meantime, before Gordon's people had a chance to put out a second song, the group had moved on to Motown, and Gordon still had these recordings of them. One of the songs was the follow-up to Big Boy called We Don't Have to Be Over 21 to Fall in Love. And by this time, I had graduated from high school, and Gordon came to me and asked me could I help to kind of sweeten it up a little bit. So what I did was I added some strings to what they had recorded, and I tried to fashion it as if the Motown arrangers had done it, because they had those real active, busy strings behind the Four Tops and the Temptations and Martha and the Vandellas and Supremes at that time. So that's what I put behind this Jackson project, and it came out pretty good. I was impressed that it had come out as well. It gave me an opportunity to meet with and work with some people that had worked with some of the best in the country, the best in the business, really, because some of the people that I had worked with on the Jackson 5 project, when I went back to college, I happened to see an album, I believe it was on Jerry Butler, and on the back of the album, they had all of the musicians in a group photo that had played on Jerry's album. In this album, in this photo, I should say, were three of the musicians that had played on the record that I had done for the Jackson 5. And I felt real special about that because these guys were some of the best. They were some of the best. And just think, they had read my music that I had written and recorded it behind the Jackson project. And of course, with Gordon, he would periodically call me to do other projects. I have done strings for him, I've done horns for him, and I've also assisted with adding some guitar or some rhythm to some records that he wanted to do. So that was my relationship getting started with Gordon. And I met some fabulous engineers and people who had produced for other artists, and it just helped me to grow. I owe a lot of credit to him because he put me in a position to know some people and to learn some things. And a lot of that wouldn't have happened had he not had the confidence in me to take me to some of the big studios in Chicago, studios like Universal Studios, which had recorded some of everybody big, white, black, all across the board. And then there was a studio called 8-Track. At the time, 8-Track Studio was the state of the art because before then, most of the studios only had 2 tracks. This had 8 tracks, so that was a real big deal. That's where we did the Jackson project at 8-Track Studio. So Gordon took me there. and that's where we worked with some of the state-of-the-art equipment. Of course, now you have people with 24 tracks in their home, 32 tracks in their home. But that was a big deal then, and some of the best engineers and musicians that I met in the industry were coming through there to make records for a lot of artists like the Staple Singers and what have you. So it was quite an experience. And then going down on Michigan, that's a whole nother story because that was called Record Row. And sometimes I would ride to Chicago from Gary with Gordon, and we would go up and down Record Row. Might be peddling some of his songs, or maybe I might peddle a song or two, or sometimes I would just sit and watch what was going on and get, familiar with some of the language and some of the things that go on in the record industry. Then after that, he managed to get a production company that had an office on Record Row. It was on 13th in Michigan, 1321 Michigan. And in that building, there were several other music industry offices there. People like, I believe Jerry Butler had an office there. Calvin Carter worked in that office. And they had Gene Chandler, and Gordon tells the story of one time we were either riding in a car or watching TV. I don't remember. But we were talking, and this group came on, and Gordon asked me if I remembered the group. And I said, no, where would I remember them from? He said, they used to ride the elevator with us in Chicago where we were on 13th in Michigan. And as it turned out, that was the beginning of Earth, Wind, and Fire. And they were called the Salty Peppers at the time. And they used to ride the elevator. We might get up on the 3rd floor. They might ride on up to the 5th floor. But there were so many musicians in and out of there. One time we were there, and I met a guy. Everybody was calling him Smitty. Smitty. I didn't know who Smitty was. He was the manager for Jimmy Reed's career at that point. So it was just a lot of things that I had done because of Gordon. I never would have done staying in Gary and getting out with the real pros. That was exciting to me, and I learned a lot too. I was in school for music. I eventually got a degree in music, but the things that I was learning wasn't being taught in college at that time. So there were a lot of things that I learned by just being with Gordon. And the day that Richard Nixon resigned from office, I was in the studio with Gordon that day. And I remember that so well because I had done a horn session. I had arranged some horns for some material that he wanted me to arrange. And when we left the studio, got back in the car, that was all the news on the radio that Richard Nixon had resigned that day. So that's going back quite a ways. And I was with Gordon that day. I think Gordon was affected by the Jacksons leaving and going to Motown. To my knowledge, he tried to get some other groups to complete some of the material that he really would have done with the Jackson 5, but they had gone on. The business is just that way, and there are some things that you do. Some of it he would have to attribute it to just not knowing the ways of the world at that time, or the way of the music world. And when you trust people and you figure that we're all going to do this thing and we're all going to be good with it, and then you find out everybody's not trustworthy, that's what happens. And then the business, you get into a thing where you have distribution packages, you have recording packages, you have production packages. There are all types of ways that records can get out. Now we're dealing with this download thing. That's a whole new, almost an idiom in itself, because there's no product to be sold like a record or a tape. It's something you download into your machine. So I think what might have been a problem was that in Gordon's case, he just was not aware of the various things that could happen, and he may have had total faith in some people that just kind of betrayed him in a sense in order to meet their goals, and they didn't really stop to consider he had a goal as well. But I worked with him with different artists. He had some other groups that would kind of remind you of the Jackson 5. Then he had some other artists that were not in that vein at all, including himself. I even worked on him on one song, one or two songs that he sang on. And I tried to encourage him to try to do the Barry White type of thing. He didn't buy it for himself, but he has such a bottom verbose, that bass in his voice. I even tried to convince him that he maybe should try to get into the Barry White thing at the time, but he just didn't see it as such. He really kind of liked the Jerry Butler sound, I could tell, because one of the songs that we did really, if they had taken Gordon's voice off the track, Jerry Butler would have done a great job with the same song too. But it's always a chance. You never really know where you're going in this business, because I have heard of artists that made records that had terrible sore throats, or they had something wrong with the record. I wished I could just do it one more time. They didn't get a chance to do it one more time, but it became a multi-million seller the way that it was finished. So you just never really know what's going to go. And so that's why I always try to work with, and I can say this in good conscience, I can say this with a smile on my face, I have almost never turned Gordon down for anything he asked me to do, because I know that he's met with some difficult times in this business, and I want to be a part of it if something should happen where he really takes off the ground, because he's been very important in my career in more ways than probably he even knows himself. But I have almost never turned him down when he asked me, help me do this. I said, oh, okay, I'll do it. And that's how it is. But that's the kind of friends we are, too. We can talk about things and just, we understand the business. Both of us understand the business even more now, because we've had many years to go through projects and many things that didn't do what we anticipated. But they still, every time you don't achieve what you want to achieve, it's still a learning process. So all of that's good.
First of all, I want to give all glory and praise to God, who is the head of my life. My name is Earlene E. Jones. I am the daughter of E. Rodney Jones. I want to just elaborate and insert on a person that I had met about 10 years ago, and his name is Gordon Keith. Met him at WVON, the new WVON radio station, and we were there for Purvis Spann's birthday, and he was sitting across the table, and he was talking about the Jackson 5 and trying to get Purvis to remember, we did this and we did that, and someone shot over to him and said, well, that's Rodney's daughter right there, and I'm just sitting there just perched, like a little bird upon a branch, and he looks at me, he said, you're E. Rodney's daughter? I'm like, yeah, I'm just listening to your history and your story, which was pretty cool. And I told him, I said, a light bulb went off. I said, because, upon my dad's demise, I cleaned out his house and shut his house down. And I came across the contracts that Mr. Keith had sent Rodney. And immediately Mr. Keith leaned into the table and said, did he sign them? I'm like, no, sorry, he didn't. I said, but I did save the contract, the affidavit stating that E. Rodney and Purvis Spann had relinquished the Jackson 5 over to you. But sorry, but he did not take care of a lot of things towards the end, and I'm pretty sure he would have signed those papers, because he's not a person that will keep someone from proclaiming their fame or their right to something that was due them. But I will still present those papers and show them to Mr. Keith, because I don't think he believes I have them, but if I read them and I knew that much, I have those papers. And I'm so sorry that they never did come forward as far as being signed, and to give him his just due as far as his rights and things with the Jackson 5. However, getting back to a radio station WVON, the Jackson 5s did come through Purvis Spann and E. Rodney Jones, and I'm learning a lot of history of this myself as far as Mr. Keith's affiliation with the Jacksons, and there were so many other people involved in a lot of the history that comes up in Chicago. And this particular documentary that we're doing now, prior to the filming of this, I learned so much also from Mr. Keith. And I learned who the choreographers were for the Jackson 5. He was there for production, for the dancing, and for so much. And these are, well, I was a kid myself coming up at that time. So there's a lot of, not a lot of things that I can expound on as far as the Jacksons and Mr. Keith and whatnot. I'm learning pretty much. I also found out too from one of the affiliates with Rodney and Mr. Keith. Well, my dad had told me this, had said this himself, that well, why did you relinquish them, you know? Well, hell, they were just, you know, Michael was such a little busybody. He was a very mischievous child. I had 5 kids of my own at home to have to keep up with and raise, you know. So I just, you know, and being there in the mix of all of that, you know, when you're a kid, you don't pay attention to all of that. You know, they were just like regular little kids that were coming up singing and dancing and trying to make it, you know. But who knew that they would go as far as they did? And I'm pretty sure Mr. Keith had that foresight to know that this family of boys, they were going to be super mega stars. And for him to have lost whatever position or stronghold or claim to fame with these boys, it's a shame. It's sad. It's not unusual in this business, you know. It's just something that goes on all the time. I was glad to be a part of this documentary, to give whatever little tidbits that I could, adding to the pursuit of Mr. Gordon Keith's claim to whatever rights that he has in this production. However, it's not over until it's over, and I just wanted to add that little part of whatever it is that we can add to the history of black superstars, black radio history, and whatever else that can come from educating the youth that's coming up now about the things, some of the people that are still here, for them to acknowledge and to learn from the legendary things and people that have paved the way for a lot of these entertainers now. And I also just want to expound upon the Rodney Jones Foundation, which was a foundation started by myself. It's a scholarship-making foundation which helps children, high school graduates or college graduates that want to pursue their career in music, radio, broadcast media and whatnot, because this is something that will always be. This will, you know, black radio history, it's not going anywhere. And I was just so glad to come up in the era and the time that I did, to know people from the VON family and people that I've just met, like Mr. Gordon Keith, and even my cousin Wilton, who came prior this interview. There's such a lot of rich history here, and I'm just so glad that Pretty Boy Productions is getting pretty much most of all this legacy and this history down on tape. I really appreciate it, and I can expound on some others things, but I don't know if we have enough time today to go through that. However, someone wanted me to mention the WVON days, and I could just say that if you ask a question and you think about this, and I mentioned this to my cousin Wilton earlier, I'm like, just think about the Motown days and Berry Gordy, and when they were producing and manufacturing beautiful black talent. I'm like, just think about this. If there had not been a WVON, how much of a Motown would there have ever really been, you know? WVON was right there in place at the time. It was just like everything was for that time and for that era. Everything was right there. Even Rodney Jones was in place because he was program director of WVON at that time. And Berry Gordy knows he played everything that he brought to him. Every record, not even really a second thought, you know, because they helped each other then. They were all, it was a camaraderie, you know, because they knew that in this business, to have each other, that's the only way they were going to make it. And not only were they just, you know, camaraderies in the city of Chicago, may it be Gary, Detroit, Ohio, California, New York with WBLS with Frankie Crocker and Hal Davis. Detroit with Al Perkins, who is my dad's best friend, who I loved very dearly. Al Perkins, as you know, had Al Hudson one way. I could go on. Jim Gates in East St. Louis, and Bernie Hayes in St. Louis, Missouri. KATZ, where Rodney had came from, also prior coming to Chicago. But it's just it would take longer than just this few minutes of documenting the true radio Black history and how a lot of these artists have come to be who they are, and it's because of legendary Black radio DJs. So let's give homage to those and that have paved the way and who have also, like I said, just helped each other and played almost any and everything that they brought, because that was good music then. The 50s and the 60s, that was good music then. Nobody really had a dog record. Nobody really had a bad record then, and because of the musicians too. You got to give credit to the musicians that played behind a lot of these singers and entertainers, whatnot. I mean, I have to say to these kids today, I wouldn't trade places with you for nothing in the world. I'm sorry. I just so love the era that I came up. I'm so thankful to God that He brought me up in the time and the era that I came up to witness all of this, the glory that came down through Him, even gospel music, I can't even expound upon that enough to just be so grateful for the legendary people in the music and the history that we have to share with this generation and any of those that want to reminisce or go through nostalgia with us, But there's more to come. We'll get back to Pretty Boy Productions. We're going to bring it. It's not just us. We got a lot of other people that's going to bring some of this knowledge to you. And I'm going to not carry on for so long because we're kind of like a little pressed for time right now. But you stay tuned because we will have more soon. And it's going to be phenomenal. Until then, peace out.